And I'm going to continue this morning from the third part of what I've been looking at in terms of the divine exchange. Okay, the divine exchange, and we're going to look at four, God willing. I've got to go quick this morning, and we're going to look at four of the things that Jesus did through the cross. What he did, what he accomplished through the cross, and he did it for these reasons. Number one, Danny, if you could put the first one on for me there. I've said these previously, but I'm just going to repeat this one. Jesus was made sin for our sinfulness, that we may be made righteous with his righteousness. Okay? That is one of the things that he accomplished at the cross. You say, what's that all about? Let me explain. Because some of these things just need a little bit of explaining, and I'm going to go down four avenues of dealing with guilt this morning, dealing with shame, dealing with poverty, and dealing with rejection. Those are the four areas that I'm going to look at this morning. But this is the one that I'm going to start with, and it's going to be look at guilt. Jesus was made sin for our sinfulness. You know, sometimes as we get older in life, okay, and I know you're all younger than I am, but for everybody, as we get older in life, sometimes we have regrets over things we've done. Yeah, some people have regrets. Some people still feel guilty over things that they did years ago, or things that they did a month ago. And that guilt hangs around people's lives, and it paralyzes people. But yet, Jesus dealt with the guilt, and I'm going to explain this a little bit now, only briefly because of time. But Jesus dealt with guilt so that we don't have to feel guilty anymore. And it's all based on his righteousness, not ours, not our ability. Now, the first thing I want to clear up is that fourth word. Jesus was made sin for our sinfulness. And I want to just differentiate between two areas. Sin, plural, S-I-N, and sins with an S on the end. Sorry, sin, singular. I can't even say that right. Sin, singular, sins, plural. And what is the difference between the two? They should be there, Dan. So the definition of sin, singular, is often refers to the evil power or evil nature that causes people to sin. Okay? Now we know, I'll put it a different way, that evil power, that evil nature that causes people to do wrong. I'll put it that way. Get rid of the word sin, it might upset you. He causes people to do wrong. And then there's that sins, plural, and those are the actual things that people do wrong. Okay? So there's a sinful nature, and then there's a result of that sinful nature. In other words, we do things wrong. Yeah? Until the sin, that evil nature, the cause is dealt with, people continue to do wrong. Okay? And what most people try and do is when they realise that they are struggling in life and they're doing things wrong and they want to overcome and they want to better themselves or deal with issues, they turn to many different avenues to try and overcome that evil nature. Some people will drink. Some people will take drugs. Some people will steal. Some people will murder. Some people will rape. Some people worry. But they do things to try and overcome that issue. But until we deal with the sin, the problem of sin, singular, we can't deal with the effects of sin, which is the plural, the things we do wrong. Yeah? You can't get rid of the rotten apple off a tree until you've dealt with the roots of the tree. You can keep pruning the branches of the tree, but you know what? If the tree itself and the ground, the soil is damaged, it's still going to produce rubbish fruit. So we can keep trying to deal with the effects of that sinful nature, but until we deal with that, people will continue to do wrong. And we know that this world gets worse and worse and worse by the week, by the month, by the year. And I don't like saying this because this really does make me feel old, but this place is a lot worse than what it used to be when I was a child. I know that sounds like my grandmother now, but I really don't want to say it because it's just like, oh dear, I sound like my grandmother now. But it is. You know, I'll go up in Netherton. We could walk around Netherton, around Dudley, to Halzoe, to Blackheath, where my grandparents lived. Never a problem, never any trouble. Very occasionally was there an issue. You wouldn't find me going those places now at night, put it like that. Because some of these places are not safe to be on your own at night. And yet years ago it was fine. You could have walked, anywhere, and nobody would really bother. Not anymore. Until we deal with the power of sin, our freedom is incomplete. Yes? Now let's go to Isaiah 53. And I want to just explain what Jesus did to deal with the root of the problem. Okay, Isaiah 53. And my prayer this morning is that we get an understanding of what I'm talking about, a revelation of what I'm talking about, because I don't want this to go over your heads and leave you confused. But I want us to get, by God's grace, an understanding of what he's saying, because it will help us. But Isaiah 53, I told you I like the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 53 verse 10, he says here, "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, and he has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed and prolong his days. And the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand." Now, the sentence that I want to look at is, when you make his soul an offering for sin. Now, that sentence is talking about Jesus. And if you look at, it says that Jesus, we know Jesus had to die. Anne explained that very well this morning. Very good, thank you, Anne. That was excellent this morning, guys. Really good, wasn't it, everybody? When Jesus came, the only way sin could be dealt with was by an offering of blood, a sacrifice. Okay? Now, here, the sin that he's talking about, the offering that was made, was a guilt offering. Okay, now you say, what's that? In the Old Testament, there was a different sacrifice and a different offering for everything. Okay? Every different connotation of sin and a problem, there was a different offering for. Whether it be they sacrificed a pigeon, or a dove, or a cow, or a calf, or whatever. They sacrificed something for that particular issue, that sin. Here, it was a guilt offering. Okay? Now, the guilt offering, when you read your Bible in the Old Testament, is also referred to as a trespass offering. So when you read your Bible and he talks about a guilt offering, or he talks about a trespass offering, he's talking about the same thing. Okay, now, what was the purpose of that offering being made? When he says here, you will make his soul an offering for sin. So Jesus died on the cross, and a guilt offering or a trespass offering for sin. The guilt or trespass offering was made as a compensation payment for unintentional or intentional transgressions. In other words, there are times when we willfully do wrong, and there are times when we don't even realize that we're doing wrong. Yes? Doesn't matter what it is. Jesus came, and the offering that he satisfied was a guilt offering. So that no matter what we do or what we've done, he dealt with it. Now, why is that important? Because when you compare, and I'll use my wife I had this conversation with John Lucamona when he came here. Jenny grew up in a Christian home. Her parents were pastors of a church. Didn't particularly do anything wrong. Okay? She wasn't the mass murderer, or the drug pusher, or the alcoholic, or the person who didn't do anything. Grew up in a nice, secure home, didn't particularly do anything wrong. Okay? Then you'll have other people who grew up in a broken home, maybe, and they did this and this and this and this and this and many, many things, that they will say to you, I know I did wrong. Doesn't matter whether you were a good girl or whether you were a bad girl. Jesus died for everybody. What we like to do in church is to glamorize the person who has murdered 20 people, who then gives their life to Jesus, and say, what a wonderful, transformed life. Yeah, I've seen that many times. And yet, the person who grew up and would say, well, I didn't really do much wrong that I know of, Doesn't matter whether you were that person or that person, Jesus still died for you. Yeah? Sometimes when we only glamorize the person who was the axe-murderer, exaggerate, you understand. Those people who say, well, I haven't really done many things wrong. I can't think of things that I've intentionally gone and done. I haven't stolen. I haven't cheated anybody out of anything. I haven't done anything. It don't matter. Jesus came and died to deal with whether it was an intentional or unintentional sin. Doesn't matter. He dealt with it. In other words, it's all inclusive. Okay? In this day and age of where we talk about everything being inclusivity, yeah? Jesus was the first politically correct, there's one for you, individual. He was all inclusive. Jesus said, I died for everybody. That will keep the politicians happy, won't it? Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And this is the importance, because you might sit there and say, what's the relevance of all this? How does that apply to me? Let's go to 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21. He says here, speaking about Jesus again, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Okay, that's the thing I said at the very beginning. Jesus became sin for those who are in sin, that we may become the righteousness of God in him. That's the exchange. He says, guys, whether you did wrong or didn't do wrong, sin, singular, that evil nature exists. So I'm going to deal with that for everybody, so that everybody is on an equal playing field, and I will remove all of the effects of it so that you can now receive the righteousness of God. Now, we know that righteousness of God, it speaks about being in right standing with God. Okay? Being in right standing with God. Now, let's go to Isaiah 61, verse 10. And I just want to read a verse which was interesting, because I like the people who've translated these into English, because they've missed a couple of words if you go back to the original language. But Isaiah 61, verse 10 says, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall be joyful in God, for he has clothed me with a garment of salvation, and he has covered me with a robe of righteousness. As the bridegroom decks himself with ornaments, and a bride adorns herself with jewels. I was at a wedding a couple of Saturdays ago. The bride there, Stephanie, beautiful lady. Well, she was a bridesmaid at my wedding 29 years ago. She got married to David, dressed up, beautiful, both of them, the bride and the bridegroom. They had changed their clothes because of the wedding. Hold that thought. Let's go back to Isaiah 61, verse 10. He says here, this is the exchange. This is the exchange. He says, first of all, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. That word rejoice is not our English way of rejoicing. I was laughing about this in the week. You look at me, I know Steve, we've had this conversation with Steve. We can watch a film on TV and it can be hilariously funny. And this will be my response. That's my response. I don't laugh. Some will laugh and fall off the chair and get really emotive over it. Me, I just think it's hilarious, but I don't respond to it. That right, Steve? We've had this conversation. When it says here, I can rejoice in the Lord, it's not having that response. Okay? Us English folk, we don't smile enough. And it's not talking about that half-hearted smile or being half-hearted happy. It's talking about rejoice. Now, the rejoice comes from the Hebrew word S-O-U-S, sus. I don't quite know if that's how you pronounce it. But that's how they've translated here. But that's not correct. Because the way it's been translated here, if you put the next one on, Dan, is actually, the Greek word is sus, asis. Okay? Which actually means, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. What's that supposed to mean? Have they got a stutter? I will rejoice. In other words, they're saying that we should go over the top in our rejoicing. Yeah? Like I said last week, we need some of the guys with the white hankies and to get us a little bit more excited about what God has done to us and in us and through us, yeah? But he says, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. He tells us to rejoice twice. He puts an emphasis on the word rejoice, an emphasis on going over the top with being grateful and pleased and happy with what God has done. I'll tell you, I look forward to the day till God gets hold of some of you and you start to dance. You know what? I will say this because I know this will freak this woman out. But I look forward to the day when Lynn runs around this room. Okay, because she knows the day's coming, just like I do, don't you, Lynn? Yeah, you do. See, I look forward to those days when someone gets that excited about what God has done to them that they can't contain it anymore. You look at a little child sometimes when they get so worked up and so happy about something. They're just like a little bottle of pop. They just go bonkers, don't they? And I said in a good way, we need sometimes to go a bit bonkers. Get that excitement and that happiness and that rejoicing that we just don't know what to do. We're that happy. But that's what he's talking about. Rejoice, guys. Go over the top. Why? Because in verse 17 it says, in the second half of verse 10, he says, he has clothed me with the garments of salvation and covered me with his robe of righteousness. Yeah? He has clothed me with garments of salvation. What does that mean? He's taken away that filthy garment that I'm about to talk about, that sin. He's taken that away from me. And he's given me a garment of salvation. When you give your life to Christ, he comes and he clothes you and says, and if I got a coat that fit me, and you don't want me to take my shirt off, but like I'll take my shirt off and say, this is a filthy garment, and put a new garment on. And he said, look, you're clothed in my salvation now, and you're covered in my righteousness, in a robe of righteousness. Yeah? You are clothed. When God looks at you, he doesn't see that filthy clothes. He looks at you and says, I see that you are clothed in the blood of Jesus. And I see the robe of right standing with God when you've given your life. So you know what? When you wake up and you feel like a bag of potatoes, yeah? And you wake up and you feel like, it doesn't matter how we feel. We are still clothed with that garment of salvation. The garment of and covered in the robe of righteousness. We often go by our experiences dictated to by how we feel. And yet our experience shouldn't be dictated to by how we feel, because your relationship with God has got nothing to do with how you feel. It's based upon Jesus saying, I will take all that rubbish and filthiness from you, and I'm going to give you righteousness, right standing before me. Yeah, but I'm not good enough. Exactly, you've got it. It's not down to how good you are. It's down to my grace that I'm going to give you this righteousness. And I'm going to come along and put this robe on you. Yeah? If you go to law, as in, the country, this is the country, the law of the land, you cannot be tried for the same thing twice. And when God came to you and he took you to court and found you guilty of sin, the jury came back and said, you're not guilty. Why aren't you guilty? Because Christ died for you and he says, I've dealt with your sin. Now, if he says you're not guilty, you can't be tried twice. So no one can ever come to you and say, Steve, last night when you had a go, I'm going to make you feel guilty now. You can't be tried twice. So you can say, well, get lost, because my righteousness is not based on how I feel. It's based on Christ. He's taken that guilt from me. And, the Holy Spirit will come and convict us of things we do wrong. And I've said very quickly, and use a verse, if we confess our sin, God is faithful and true to forgive us and cleanse us from all our unrighteousness. If you walk around all day feeling guilty about something you did yesterday, that guilt does not come from the presence of God. It comes from either yourself, because you need some emotional release of false guilt, or it comes from the devil who tries to make you feel guilty. It is not from God. So we don't have to put up with this feeling all day, because we're free from guilt. Why? Because I've said before, the offering that Jesus paid was a guilt offering. It was a guilt offering for things that we did, that we know we've done, or we don't know we've done. So it doesn't matter what you've done. or what you haven't done, you don't have to be guilty anymore because Jesus took that away from you. No, based on that, that is why it says we need to rejoice, rejoice. We should now all be doing the conga around the room. Yeah? We should now be getting excited because we are free from that type of thing. And I've seen more excitement in a Wolves fan than I've seen in some of us this morning. Let's go to Romans 8. Let me just give 2 verses and I want to move on to the next one because time is rapidly running out. Romans 8, verse 1. See, when you feel guilty, who is the accuser of who does the Bible talk about being the accuser of the brethren? Not your mother-in-law, come on. Don't be like that. The devil is the accuser of the brethren. In other words, he comes to you and chirps in your ear hole. You were nasty yesterday. You were short with your husband. You had a go at the shop assistant when you didn't need to. You had a go at that guy because he overtook you and cut you up in the car. What a bad person you are. Then we crumble because he takes our confidence from us and we think, oh, I've done it again. God says, no. Romans 8 verse 1. There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. That's what he says here. There is no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. For who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Let's go to Revelation 12. Revelation 12, verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation, strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his cross, of his Christ, have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before God day and night, has been cast down. And this is the verse, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. I've used this before, and by the word of attested by the things that we say, for they did not love their lives unto death. Our righteousness before God is based on what Jesus did. It's not based on who we are. So we don't have to ever worry about failure, doing wrong, because when you've given your life to Christ, he comes and takes away that sinful nature. And he replaces it with the righteousness of God. That's the exchange that Jesus did at the cross. So we can reject the accusation and we can reply and just say, I'm forgiven. I'm justified. It's just as if I never sinned. I'm justified before God. And that frees us from guilt. Because I tell you, guilt, it paralyzes people. Feeling guilty for things that they've done, whether it be today, yesterday, last week, last year, 10, 20 years ago. I gave my child up for adoption and I've felt guilty ever since. For example. Let's go to the next one. And I want to look at this one. Jesus endured our poverty that we might share his abundance. Jesus endured our poverty that we might share his abundance. And that abundance, we know from John 10, verse 10, that Jesus came to give us life and life more abundantly. And that is emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The sacrifice that Jesus made was one perfect, complete, and all-sufficient sacrifice that covers the needs of every human being. Whatever your need is, there's a solution through Jesus. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. I hope this is making sense to you, some of you. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God. See, for by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not of yourself, it's a gift of God. We can't earn it. We can't do anything to buy it. It's a gift that God gives to us. And when it says here, Jesus endured our poverty that we might have his abundance. Now, let me just say this, because as soon as you say abundance, our minds always go to money. If I said, the blessing of the Lord makes rich, oh, that goes to money. Get a life. Do you want a rich life? A life that is thriving in all areas of your life. Yes, that's what Jesus is talking about. The blessing of the Lord makes you thrive in all areas of the life. We need to get past getting hung upon words for some reason. But having an abundance, let me just say, this doesn't mean you're spiritual. Because I know people who've got an abundance and they've got enough for their own needs with something left over for others, but their mindset is one of poverty. And I know people who have little financially, but their mindset is an abundant mindset. And they want to give and bless people even with the little they have. So whether you have a lot or whether you have little doesn't mean that you have the abundance that God is talking about. Because in fact, I know some wealthy people who are the most tight people you could ever imagine. They don't want to bless and give to anybody. They want to keep it because it's mine. I earned it. Do you really think though that God didn't, that God kept you, gifted you, gave you opportunities for work to bless you, and you sit there in your arrogance and say that you earned it? That came from the Lord, not from you. Because you could be dead. You're glad you came, aren't you? Let's go to, but it's true. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8. 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8. It says here, I nearly read the wrong verse. 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8. It is God, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, that you always having all sufficiency in all things may have an abundance for every good work. Yeah? God takes care of you so that you will have an abundance for every good work. Why? Because Jesus took your poverty so that you could have an abundant life. And that includes mentally and emotionally. You know the person who is emotionally wounded because they don't want to give to people. They don't want to talk to people. They want to avoid people. Is that a rich life? It's not, is it? Because you know what? One thing I've learned in my short life is actually being with people blesses me. Because they say things and do things that I don't know that I can learn from. And sometimes they tell me off and I'm thinking, ooh, but actually I needed that because they were right and I needed to hear that as well. So being with people, whether it be sometimes, oh, I didn't like that, actually helps you. So having that abundant life where we have good friends is important. Now let me just give you 3 levels of provision so that we understand what this abundance is. Just put them all on there for me, Danny. Insufficiency means this. You don't have enough for what you need. So you go to Aldi and your food bill comes to 50 quid, but you've only got 25. That's called insufficiency. Sufficiency is where you go to Aldi and your food bill is 50 quid. Sorry, 50 pounds, let me speak properly. 50 pounds, and your food bill is 50 pounds. You've got sufficient to pay the bill. Abundance is you go to Aldi and your food bill is 50 pounds, but you've got 100 in your pocket. Now I've got more than I need. So I can pay my 50 pounds, but I've still got money in my pocket. What do? We think, well, that's for me. That's for my Domino's pizza tonight. What happens if it was for you, for God to say, you know what? See that person there in the till? They're really struggling. Yeah, but their clothes are better than mine. I don't give a monkeys about that. They're struggling. Use some of your 50 pounds, maybe 25, to go and contribute towards their shopping bill. That's called abundance. Well, I'm not doing that. I was clever. I went around with my calculator to try and get my shopping bill as low as I can because I want to keep my money. And God says, no. I have given you abundance so that you can be a blessing to other people. What did I read before? Acts 20:35. It's better to give than to receive. Why can't we be a blessing to somebody? It would frighten the life out of me if I turned up at Asda or whatever and they said to me, let me do a BBC, and other shops exist, or whatever they say. If I went to Asda and the lady said to me, oh, are you Keith? Yeah. Your food's been paid for. I'm like, well, who did that then? I can't tell you. Who? I want to know. Who is it? Well, the person I was there, but they've gone now. You'd fall over, wouldn't you? Especially if you just put £200 worth of food in the trolley. You said, I should have put 300 in. Sorry, it's a bad joke. See, God's provision is not so that we can keep it to ourselves. God's provision is so that we can give it to other people and help them. No, I'm not saying you've got to give every last penny of your pocket away, and you've got to give it so that you struggle. I'm not talking, but abundance is the fact that you've covered your needs. God has covered your needs, and then He says, you know what? You've got a little bit extra. Bless that person. Give it to that person. Why don't you buy something for that person? Like I said, I know people you can go to for a round of drinks after work, and there's always those people who will not buy a drink. They won't. Don't matter who they are. And I could go out with some church folk and they'd be the same. You know some, I know some. They wouldn't buy you one if you were the last person on the planet. And I know somebody who were thinking, oh, that's that person, that's that person. I would be the person who'll buy you a drink. Why? First of all, McDonald's coffee is £1.69 in some of them, £1.59 in others. It ain't that much money. But you can, even in a small way, you can be a blessing to somebody. Why not? Why not? And you know what? It's more blessed to give than to receive, because when you give, God will give unto you, pressed down, shaken together, running over. It says in Luke. It was Jenny's grandfather went to a Methodist church over in Sutton Coldfield. And I was at his 84th or 85th wedding. That'd be great, wouldn't it? His 84th or 85th birthday party over in Sutton Coldfield. And he stood up, and he was originally a cobbler. He repaired shoes. And that's all he did. He put new soles and heels on shoes. But he attended a Methodist church. He's a Christian man, but he gave. Okay? And I saw him, and I looked at Jenny, her grandfather, and we laughed. These were his words. He says, I don't understand this. I keep giving. And the more I give, the more I get. I just don't understand. I can't give it away quick enough. This was an 85-year-old man who ended up quite wealthy. He wasn't when he was younger, but he ended up that way. And he said, I can't give it away quick enough. I keep giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. And he just keeps coming back to me. I don't know why. No, he didn't understand the principle. He was following the principle. He lived the principle, even though he didn't understand what he was doing. We want the money to come back, but we don't want to give it. We want to have friends, but we don't want to be friendly. We'd like people to buy us a drink, but we won't buy them one. And yet Jesus says, I've taken your poverty so that you can have an abundant life. Yeah. Psalm 96 verse 8, won't turn there, but he says, give glory to the Lord, bring an offering and come into his courts. So whenever you come into God's presence, he says there, bring an offering. Don't come in empty-handed. Yeah? Some of us think we need to tip God. Let me see what's in my pocket. Oh, I've got 3 pence. That'll do. That'll be what I tip God with this Sunday. God, I'll give you some sad news for you guys. God doesn't need your tip. He doesn't need you to come in and try and find the fluff in your purse, because that's not honouring to God. Sometimes we fight with ourselves to find how little we can give. Well, I have to give to this person. I've had to do this. I have to do that. Yeah, we all do. No, listen, I'm not saying this because I want your money, so don't get over that one. I've told you before. This is what the Word of God says, and it will help you. And I'm here to help you. When people say to me, oh, you speak the truth, Keith. Well, of course I do. Because who is the truth? Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I talk about Jesus. I tell you what he says from his book. And that's why we need that freedom, because some of us are bound financially, and we don't need to be bound financially, because God says you can have an abundance. Because I took your poverty. You can have an abundance emotionally. See, provision is not just material wealth, is it? I love being connected with people overseas. I don't know, if you hang around me long enough, my phone's ringing. Phone call from India, from Pakistan, from Burundi, from Kenya, from Malawi. I'm getting guys contacting me all the time from all over the place. Why? Because I've connected with them first. And I will make sure that I'm friends with them, and then we stay in touch. I've got friends all over the place. Christian friends, Muslim friends. See, material wealth isn't everything. Jesus took our poverty so that we could have an abundant life. 2 more to go. Next one. Jesus, these two are shorter, so you can take a sigh of relief. Jesus bore our shame that we could share his glory. All this happened at the cross. We just think Jesus died, stuck in a cave, came to life, job done, went to heaven, and that's it. And that's when we remember Jesus, that's what we remember. And yet he says here, these are the things that he did. In Isaiah 53 verse 5, we'd read before, he said, by the stripes of Jesus, by his stripes, we are healed. 1 Peter 2:24 says in there that by the stripes of Jesus, we were healed. And that healing, I've said to you before, is not just physical, but it is emotional healing, mental healing. And for some of us, we carry emotional wounds. And you know, people think I'm stupid, and they think God is stupid. And they think they can hide the way they behave and blame other people when they are emotionally wounded. And in a church, who is a person they always like to blame? Hello. It's always me. It's always my fault. And yet they don't realise that they are wounded emotionally, and they go from one church to another church, to another church, to another church, wounded because someone did something to them. But they won't acknowledge it. They would rather point the finger, and that finger generally is pointing the bloke at the front. And there's a common denominator with those folk. It's everybody else bar them. Yeah? Spoke to one man not too long ago, had a conversation. Everything I said to him, he twisted it and threw it back in my face. I'm like, there's nothing I can say, is there? Absolutely nothing I can say, because everything I say to you, you are twisting it and throwing it back in my face. I'm wrong, Jenny's wrong, the church is wrong, this 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 is wrong. This is wrong. And I sat there and I not to it, inside I'm laughing. I'm thinking, you don't see, dear, you don't see the wounds and the hurt that you're carrying, that you've not wanted to deal with. And we're not here to judge anybody, but Jesus died that we could be free from the shame and the rejection that we feel in life. Because we all are shamed at some point. We're all rejected at some point, okay? If you're a human alive on this planet, you'll have been rejected by somebody at some point, okay? Now, in Hebrews 12, verse 2, it speaks about Jesus endured shame. Think about it. Anne said, the soldiers spat on him. I'll come up to you and spit in your face in front of everybody. Are you going to feel encouraged and built up? You're not, are you? You're going to feel ashamed because someone has treated you like that. Then Jesus hung on the cross and everyone looked at him. And I'm sure there were people laughing, and I'm sure there were people mocking and pointing the finger. Do you think he'd have felt shame? But he took that shame upon him so that we don't have to feel shame. Now, the word shame means this: a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by wrong or foolish behaviour. Okay? We have all been somewhere in life where somebody has said something about you in front of other people and made you look stupid. And I'm not talking have a bit of banter. I wind Steve up about Wolves and he winds me up about the Albion. Or, I'm not talking about a bit of fun. But, sometimes I could say stuff now, personal, about Steve. I'll pick on Steve because we have very similar character, and he won't be bothered. But if I did, that would bring shame to him in front of everybody else. It would bring rejection to him. When does this happen for many of us? When we are children. And you're pulled out to the front of the class, and you're meant to stand there, and the teacher gets the ruler, not that way, but that way, put your hand out and cracks you over the knuckles with it. Why? Because you happen to say something at the wrong time. And you know me, I don't shut up. So I'm always in every school report I had from every teacher through my entire school career was, he'd do a lot better if he stopped talking. No, that's hard to believe in it. But I could fetch all my school reports because I've kept them. I have them. So I could show them to you. Keith would do a lot better if he stopped talking. God bless them. But you know what? As a result of that, now you understand why I would stutter. As a result of that, we get humiliated in front of people. Why do you think, I've said that, I don't mind saying these stories because you may relate to them. Why do you think as a little boy, when I eventually get out of the wheelchair and go to school, I sit there, I don't know you can go to the toilet. I've got my little paisley pum bag that my mum made for me, with my little black pumps in that I hated, and my shorts and my t-shirt, and I need the toilet. I don't know because no one's told me you put your hand up to go to the toilet in school. So I sit there and wet myself all over the floor, all over my clothes, all over my PE kit. And everyone's laughing at you. Now, don't you think that for an 8-year-old that becomes humiliating? Now that may be my experience, but you'll have your own. Something somebody said to you at some point to do something to you, which may or may not have intended to hurt you, but it did. Because, you know, we can say things without thinking. Our brains and our mouths don't always connect, do they? And what is funny to one person isn't always funny to the person on the receiving end. And this, now I'm going to say this, we need to be careful with our humour, okay? That we don't say and do something in front of someone that we think is funny, but it embarrasses them or humiliates them. That becomes important. Have fun, by all means. You know me, I'll muck around all day. But we've got to be careful that we don't overstep the mark, because that humiliating and embarrassing experience comes to us in our families. Nothing worse than our brother and sister having a pop at each other, is there? Yeah? Coming to my family with my 2 sisters, you'd understand what I mean. That happens at school. Your friends. It happens in church. Guys, it happens in church. Your husband or your wife say things to you that is embarrassing, especially in front of other people. And you know what the sad thing is about shame, and I haven't got long to dig deep into this, but the sad thing about shame is it often stops you from lifting up your eyes and looking in the face of God. Why do I say that? Because you see people, look at me, Steve, they can't make eye contact with people because there's something in them, there's a bit of shame. There's shame there. Oh, don't look at me, Steve. And they struggle to make eye contact with people because there's the shame there. Because when he talks about in the Bible about lifting up your eyes and looking at the face of God. Some of us, we struggle to do that. We are unwilling, unable to look into the face of God. We are unable and willing, with confidence, to look into the eyes of another person, because the eyes are the gateway into our soul. And when I look into Caroline's eyes, I look into who she is. You can see into the person's soul. Yeah, so we can see. That's a natural thing. That's not speak to anybody and they'll tell you that. But in Job 22:26, he says, when shame is removed, we can lift up our faces. We don't have to feel ashamed of things. You don't have to feel ashamed. I would love to go back and meet with some of those kids that I went to school with. Because I'd frighten the life out of them. They wouldn't expect me to be doing what I'm doing now. A couple of them know. But some of them wouldn't expect me. I look at their lives and I see what they're doing and how their lives are in such a mess. And they were the ones who were humiliating people left, right and centre. In fact, it's a weird thing about my age group at school, because a lot of those people that I know of, I can tell you their names, have all died. And some of these died in the 30s and 40s. But we can't live with that shame, because Jesus said, I've taken that shame so that you can receive my glory, the presence of God. That radiance. You see someone who's been in God's presence, they're radiant. There's something different about them. Pick on Lynn, I hope you don't mind. Lynn comes with a mask on, never said boo to a goose, would scuttle in, sit down, hide. Now you can't shut her up. The mask is off, she'll sing, she'll talk, she'll pray. I'm not saying that, I'm saying that what a difference the glory of God makes in a person. What a difference it makes in a person. And you know what? We need to let the presence of God rest on us and release us from that shame so we can lift up our face to God and thank Him. Now, the final one. Just a couple of minutes on this. Jesus endured our rejection that we might enjoy his presence. Shame is the opposite of glory. Rejection is the opposite of acceptance. And Jesus endured that rejection that we might have acceptance as a person. He says the definition of rejection is a sense of being unwanted and unloved. Now, for some of us, the definition of rejection is a sense of being unwanted or unloved. Some of us, even though people have said to you that they love you, inside of you, you've still felt that sense of rejection from your parents when you were young. Things happen. Sometimes family life stuff happens, and they're not at fault in a way, but it's just the way it was, and that way it was made you feel rejected. Yeah, by your grandparents. My grandparents. My grandfather died, so I can say this, and I'll say quite happily, and he's my mother's dad. Quite happily, he favoured the rest of my cousins over me. As a child, that used to bother me. God orchestrated everything so that he died in my arms when I was 19. He died in my arms, my grandfather. And I chuckle because I think, that circle of that rejection now that I felt, because he never said anything positive. He would give them money, wouldn't give me any. He would say nice things to them, but he wouldn't say nice things to me. As a little boy, you might think, well, what's the problem? Get over it. Pull yourself up, man. Stop being a wimp. I'm a sensitive thing with a big mouth. I'm sensitive. And as a little boy, that really hurt. That rejection. Mother Teresa said, the worst sickness that exists is not being loved. Thank you. Is that Mother Teresa? Did she turn up? The worst sickness is not being loved. And you know what the interesting thing is in 1 John 4, and with these 2 verses I'm finished. 1 John 4, verse 19. He says, we love because Christ first loved us. When we are not loved as people, or when we don't sense that we are loved by people, and there's that rejection, it could come from your husband or wife, your ex-husband, your ex-wife, but when we don't feel loved, we find it difficult to give love. But there's a solution, because he says, he first loved us. While we were still a sinner, he loved us. He loves us first. God ain't daft, is he? He loved us first. And because he loves us first, and we let go of that rejection, we can receive that acceptance and say, you know what? He loves me, which enables me to love people. We are incapable of being loved, unless love has been awakened in us first by somebody else. We're incapable of being loved unless love has been awakened in us first by somebody else. A couple of things. A person who has never been loved does not know how to love. Many want to be loved, but unable to. And that father's love, we talk about Father God, but a father's love is irreplaceable for a child. The mom is important, but that security is found in the arms of a father. That's why in this world, when there's so many absent fathers, the generation that grows up without a father, you see the way they behave because of the absence of a natural father. And until this generation have an encounter with God the Father, their lives will never change. But we also here, we get rejected because of our size, our shape, the clothes we wear, our nationality, where you live, your family, your colour, your intellect. And you know what? What that tells me, if people want to reject you, they'll find a reason. That's what it really tells me. They'll reject you for anything. They'll reject you because you're wearing black shoes and not brown shoes. They'll reject you, you know what I mean? They'll reject, if they don't want to love you, they'll find a reason to reject you. But God says this morning, we're accepted in him. We are accepted in him. For some of us, that rejection goes back, and this is another story, but I do want to finish. I'm just getting the flow. It goes back to when we was in our mother's womb. And we made it very certain that when Amelia, Daniel and Zoe was in Jenny's room, that we would sing to the girls. We'd lay hands on them, would we? We'd play songs to them. We'd speak the Bible to them. That's what we used to do. Don't care what anybody thinks. That's what we used to do. Because we realized it was important that we said godly things to our girls when they were in the room. And for some of us, when you were in your mother's room, things were said that you picked up the rejection. And it's affected you ever since. Maybe an unwanted pregnancy, and that spirit of rejection comes in, and you don't know why you struggle to love people and to accept people. It's just there. Someone did something somewhere at some point, and now everybody who was similar to that person, you don't like. A pastor. Why do you think there's many people who come to church and leave? A pastor at some point said something, they took the wrong way, they took the up and left. Every church leader they see thereafter, they think is going to treat them the same way. But as I've said, probably a bad analogy, there's good car salesmen, there's bad car salesmen. Yeah? There are good pastors, there are bad pastors, just the same. There are good apples and bad apples. And just because someone has said something to you, we don't want to hold that rejection. We don't want to hold the wounds in our heart and in our mind of what somebody said to us, because you know what? It's going to affect the future of our life. And Jesus said, with this I finish, he took our rejection upon him so that we can live a life that is accepted through Christ. Now that to me is a great place. We don't have to earn God's approval, earn God's acceptance, earn God's love. He took the pain, the rejection, because he says to every single one here this morning, I love you, I accept you, I approve of you. It doesn't matter how you feel this morning. That's what God says to everybody here. You're loved, you're approved of, you're accepted. Go and live an abundant life. Go and live that abundant life that I died to give you. See, the cross is important, guys. It's not just a bit of bread and a bit of wine or juice. It's far, 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 far greater. The impact it has on some people. Our job now is to receive those words and let it have an impact on our life. That's what we need to do. I am going to encourage you, and I don't do this, I don't think I've ever done this, but I know people watch this. A lot of people I know watch this in Africa, okay? Different parts of Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, because they messaged me to say they watch this. So I'm going to keep this recording to say this to them. Share the video to your friends and share your video to other pastors and leaders that you know, because this is something that everybody needs to hear. Because church has a reputation for condemnation and judging, when really what Jesus came for was to accept you and love you and approve of you.